Hello, I'm Tom Hierck coming to you from the west coast of Canada in a lovely town called Gibsons, British Columbia. Thanks for joining us here this afternoon, evening in some locations. Looking forward to talking about this whole notion of learner-centered grading. And in essence, the subtitle, How Less Means More.
So glad to have all of you joining us, and Tom, who I've gotten to know a little bit over these last few months, and who is just an amazing man. So to get us started off, we're going to give people maybe one more minute to hop on. We've already got a lot of you, but this one was popular as expected, both because of Tom's following and because grading, as it should be, is at the fore of many of our conversations right now. And yeah, we see people jumping in from all over. If you want to, you can put in the chat who you are and where you're from so others can see. And just remember when you do that to select all panelists and attendees. And already seen Donnie Manning, Donnie Dynamic, manning the Facebook Live for us. We appreciate you, Donnie. I've got somebody, Wanda from the Bronx, Anita from New York, Kevin from Illinois, and a lot of others. I'm going to throw guys in the chat room one more time, just some quick directions and a link to that handout. We've got Kathy from Hawaii.
Oh, that's great.
And now I think we're right about a good time. So just to introduce Tom really quickly, if you don't know him, he's been in education for about 40 years, and he has done, I think, pretty much every role you can. Teacher, admin, district office, executive director, obviously consultant and author. I'm sure there's things I'm leaving out in that career. And something interesting about him is he's written about 15 books, which I think probably took maybe even longer than the 45 marathons he's run. And as an ex-runner who's never even run one marathon, I'm very impressed by that. But we're so glad to have him here as one of our partner consultants and as a thought leader for our learner-centered grading. And you can see right here, Grading for Impact, excellent book. I recommend you pick up. I'll throw a link to that in the chat, and I'll also throw a link to a great little mini packet that we may bring up a little bit later on that I've gotten and absolutely love. But because we've got a lot to cover, I don't want to spend too much time with me talking, so I'm going to hand it over to Tom, and I promise you guys are going to enjoy this. Keep putting things in the chat, and I'll be checking as we go. When you have questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, send them to Donnie on Facebook Live or to me in the Zoom chat, and we will get to everything we can. Very quickly, we are the Core Collaborative, and here are some of the ways you can get in touch with us. You can take a quick screenshot of that if you want. And anyway, we'll keep going. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Isaac. Appreciate being here, and thank you all for joining. It's a brave new world we've entered here with this method of talking about our profession, this profession that we all chose, or in some cases chose us, and that we all love. I know that part of the uniqueness here, and what I'm hearing as I talk with colleagues, is all around this notion of what are we going to do around grading and assessment? How are we supposed to manage that complexity? Even more so now when we're not getting a chance to see and hang out with our kiddos. They're not coming to school. We're trying to do this electronically, remotely. And where I've seen a lot of the conversation go of late is this: those who have spent a lot of time thinking about the impact of grading, those who have spent a lot of time thinking about the assessment paradigm, they've spent a lot of time also looking at the standards, broken them down into learning targets, and they're finding that it's a little bit easier. Now, I say that cautiously because nothing's really easy about our profession, but the transition to not seeing those bodies every day and still trying to come up with some methods of evaluation and instruction, if you spent the time deliberating, going through the standards, transitioning talking about what a grade means, I'm hearing from colleagues that they're finding this transition to be a little easier. So what I hope we can do in the time we have together is to talk about what does this mean? You know, we intentionally chose the title Grading for Impact because I can't think of something in our profession that is more of, the analogy of thumbs up, thumbs down than anything else we do. And the message we send to our students and the weight that this carries for them. We have some kids who believe very early on in their school life that they're marginal, that, if they happen to get over the fence, that's as good as it's going to be. We have some kids who view school as a 13-year sentence, not this awesome opportunity to learn and to grow, right? I think we, if we started to think about the futures of our kids, I think it's pretty clear. We don't want everyone doing the same thing, right? I bet in this audience that we have here today, we've got a myriad of talents and abilities. Mm-hmm. Listen, I was watching my neighbor the other day change the oil in his vehicle. And I said, I just bring my car in to get it done. He said, it's really easy. You should just do that yourself. You could save yourself, the $29 or whatever the price was. And I let him know that, yes, I probably could, but I'd be covered from head to toe in oil. My driveway would be covered in oil. And I wouldn't be very good at it, right? I would never be able to get to that point of proficiency. Listen, we got kids, we got people who grow up that have talents that are awesome that I don't possess. And so how do we start to get those kids believing they can? For me, it all ties back to what we do with our grading and assessment practice. So it's clear, right? And I always like to go back to what's our why? What's our purpose? What's the purpose behind grading? Because, grading's been a contentious topic for decades. You heard Isaac talk about this is coming up on year 38 for me.
Yeah.
It has gone by in a heartbeat, I can tell you. My youngest daughter is in her 4th year of teaching. I find that virtually impossible to believe because I haven't let her out at night yet, right? She's still my little child. Dad, I'm 32, right? It's gone by quickly. And I can tell you that every year I've been an educator, we have had this debate. We've had this question. And I can also tell you quite clearly that I've been guilty of engaging in practice that I'll tell you quite clearly today never should have happened, right? So it's been a contentious issue for a long, long time. And change has been very slow. Sometimes the change has been slow because of factors external to us. We all worry about what the college is going to say if we don't have the traditional 0 to 100 scale. We all worry about what the GPA is going to look like. And I can tell you that in my province of British Columbia, we stepped away from having final exams in the senior year of high school over a decade ago. And when we did this initially, we had all kinds of how are they going to be able to determine their access to a college or university. Listen, our job is to prepare kids for the real world. It's not to replicate the real world. It's to give them the skills that might allow them to be successful. Here's what I know for certain. I have yet to see a college decline a number of students in first year because of some number not being there. Listen, let's be clear. First year is the gravy year.
Yeah.
Right? We want lots of people coming to first year knowing full well that the transition to 4-year degree is less than a third of the kids who enter. First year is the moneymaker. Right? Colleges will always find a way. Our college enrollment has not decreased since we stopped having external exams. As an aside, I believe one of the things that's happening now in our current health crisis is a lot of jurisdictions are saying we don't need the external exam. You know what? We don't. And we probably never did. We'll find ways to replicate and be able to give good information, factual information on kids' progressions toward the essential learning targets. What do we have agreement on? I think universally people will say to me, the current grading practices don't reflect the learning that's taking place in schools. I don't ever get a pushback on that. However, the struggle is there. How do we transform from what we've done? Let's suggest this. Everybody who is in on this particular master class this afternoon, you all began practicing to be teachers as 5-year-olds in your kindergarten class. We have spent a lot of time convincing folks that this 0 to 100 is the best currency. It's easily understood. We all know what it meant to. I look back on some of the conversations I had early on in my career, and I'm embarrassed by them. I'm embarrassed to say that I took part in a year-end conversation looking at a student deciding between student A and student B, going to the third decimal place across 8 different content pieces with 8 different adults to decide who our brightest kid was. We used to believe we knew the difference. In our province, 86% was an A. We knew with great certainty and specificity who was the 86. And if you were 85, we knew why. Heck, we got so good that we knew the difference between 85.5, we were bumping them up, and 85.4, that's a solid B. I'm not sure that we have that evidence to that specificity. And certainly not across 8 individuals. We all have our own biases. We all have our own things that we notice that others don't. You've all had a unique journey to get to this point in your lives. Nobody's lived your life. Nobody has the biases that you have. And biases, by the way, aren't accepted, right? We all have them. Nobody grew up the way I did. And I didn't grow up the way anybody else on this webinar grew up. So that's going to lead me to look at things in a certain way. The way I see things dictates what I do. And what I do dictates what I get. Right? So we're struggling with how do we reform, how do we let go of this really comfortable. And Isaac's going to make a link to, I do a lot of minute musings. And it's really what the name describes. It's about a minute where I ponder on a particular topic. And I did one recently that we'll give you a link to that talked about the difference between 0 to 100 and 1 to 3. And some districts I'm working in are going 1 to 3 as they're grading. Some are going 0 to 4. It's not about the numbers, it's about the conversation you have. In essence, what I've come to realize is I think 0 to 100 is hanging on as long as it has for all the wrong reasons, not for all the right reasons. At its core, I believe 0 to 100 gives us way more ways to consequence kids without us having to really delineate what that consequence was for. I want you to think about this. If you were reduced to 3 levels, 1, 2, 3, what would that do for the conversation you and your colleagues would have to have around what it means to be a 1, basic, what it means to be a 2, approaching, and what it means to be a 3, proficient? And let go of a 2 is 2 out of 3. It isn't. A 2 is approaching. You might be really close to achieving. I'd like you to think about how deep the dialogue would be amongst your colleagues, let alone with students who would now have greater clarity. I'm going to hazard a guess that everybody on this webinar probably had a subject you did really well in, and you maybe got a 90. What did that 90 really mean? Well, it meant you did well. You may have got home and grandpa gave you $5 because you got a 90. But what did it really mean? Did it mean you were wildly proficient on? Was that grade padded with stuff like homework, class effort, participation? You turned in everything on time. You brought a box of Kleenex to class if you were a kindergarten kid. Did we have other things that populated that 90? So I understand why we struggle. So where do we want to go? I think the time is now well past to move from that very familiar 0 to 100 based on what we thought was some level of agreement to a target-based approach to grading. We work carefully through designed units of study, and we assess kids, and when they aren't there yet, that most important 3-letter word in our profession, we reteach and we reassess. I have no qualms with what anyone would tell me is the essential learning for kids in their grade level and content area. If you tell me that's what every kid needs to know, then let's go to work. I agree with you. Every kid needs to know. That doesn't mean we only give them one chance to know it. We have some kids, I bet you we have some adults who don't get it the first time. Look, I love making things out of wood. I am all thumbs. But I have a friend who is a master woodworker, and he has every person who's a woodworker, their dream shop. He has every tool. I'll go over and I'll make a cutting board that'll take me 3 months to make, that'll take him 30 minutes. I love doing it. I'll get better at it the more he spends time with me. Right? So if kids don't get there yet, they aren't proficient, they aren't approaching, are you prepared to give them another chance? And by the way, once they get it, can we also be clear that once they get it, they got it? Can we move beyond only praising first time smart? Smart is smart, right? Once you understand something, was it relevant that once upon a time you didn't understand that thing? Can we move to proficiency being proficiency? Can we get away from what I describe as an irrational fear that we will have too many smart kids in our class? Shouldn't the objective be, once you've established need to know, that we do our very best to ensure every kid knows it? Are there some differences? Certainly. When I taught Physics 12, I had a very gifted, unique, self-selected group of kids who were passionate about that content. I knew I could do different things with my elite Physics 12 kids than I could do with my introductory grade 7 science kids. So yeah, there's some variations that start to happen, but it would be the same thing. Once I established what my Physics 12 kids needed to know, we went to work to ensure they knew it. So at the end of our time together, I hope I've given you some capacity to learn how the shift to target-based grading and reporting increases the clarity for all of our stakeholders. Understand how the assessment, reassessment paradigm is impacted by this. And then our next steps. Right? I want this to be more than we had a good time together. I want you to think about this. What's your next first step along this journey? So this is the great debate, right? 0 to 100 or 1 to 4. And I've had people say to me, yeah, but I can't. I think I could accomplish all the same stuff if you let me stick with 0 to 100. And as I said earlier, I think it just gives way too many outs. I think it's really difficult to get to the level of clarity that going to a reduced scale gives us, that causes us to really have to dig in and define what each of those levels mean. Isaac, was there a question?
Nope, sorry about that. Keep going.
No worries. So when we talk about this whole notion of learning centered, of grading for impact, here are some key points. We don't grade the practice. Practice is practice. We do a lot of formative assessment to help you close the gap, to identify where the gaps are so that I, as your teacher, can come up with the appropriate instructional strategies and designs to ensure that you indeed get the need to know. Right? Practice is practice. In fact, if we do formative really well, the summative ought to yield very few surprises. Right? When I was coaching, we did all of our hard work in practice so that at the game, we could see the benefits of all that practice. Right? We allow for reassessment. It's about need to know. And I don't want us to be twisted in knots about what happens when we give a second chance. That we've got to come up with a formula that says, okay, well, first time smart, but if you had to do it a second time, we have to put a ceiling on. You could only be at most 70% smart. Or we've got to add your first, your second, divide by 2 to come up with something else. It's about the need to know. Listen, we when our kids were very young, we lived right beside a lake. We wanted all our kids to swim. Not all of our kids were born as swimmers, right? So we sign them up for swimming lessons. I want you to imagine this scenario. You take your kid in for a swimming lesson. Red Cross has all of the wonderful badges. And at each badge, you have to do different sort of skills. Imagine you were trying to get the red badge. And part of the requirement for red badge is you've got to swim 2 laps of the pool. Now, your child does that. And you believe then that your child is entitled to the red badge. And just as you are prepared to accept the red badge, the instructor says, oh, whoa, wait a minute now. Listen, we got to count where your son was before to where he is right now. And, you know, when you first arrived, he was somewhat of a drowner. So we've got to add that up to his current level of proficiency. He's not quite a swimmer yet. I mean, would you agree that when he came the first day, he jumped in the pool and he swam like a rock? Yes, I would agree. That's why we brought him to you. And thank you for your brilliant instruction. He's now swimming like a fish. We'll take our red badge. Where you used to be can't be relevant or have greater relevance than where you are now. Smart is smart, not just first-time smart prized and subsequent smart penalized. Third point, we're going to remove non-academic. I believe on-time performance is important. I believe in meeting deadlines. I believe in being prepared, and I believe you should report on those. I just don't believe you should report on those in a way that negatively impacts or positively inflates kids' progress towards the academic targets. So we'll talk about establishing a different protocol or report cards. You could use the same 1 to 4, 1 to 3 scale that would talk about kids' ability to meet deadlines, kids' ability to demonstrate responsibility, kids' ability to demonstrate respect, all important skills for them to have when they transition to the adult world. And then finally, we use their proficiency against the learning targets to determine their grades. This is the foldable that Isaac referred to earlier. And it's simply just, as it implies, a foldable, a 3-pager. And it's got all of the content in a nice, easy, stuff it in your binder. And we'll get you a link. NPR, National Professional Resources, is the source of this. And it's just there. And I like to have those. I have them in a variety of content areas that are just quick reference guides. So we're all familiar with the standards, right? Standards are often broad statements, however, of what every student should be able to know and do in the content area at every grade level. They have a relatively high level of complexity, but oftentimes we find they're too broad to really get to what we want kids to know. Part of my background was in teaching mathematics, and I found oftentimes the mathematics standards would have 7 or 8 or 9 targets within them. And then I was supposed to roll up all of those proficiencies to a mark on the standard. Now what happens? Let's just, for argument's sake, say that the standard had 9 targets. 3 low-level targets, 3 medium-level targets, and 3 high-level targets. Now imagine we're on a 1 to 4 scale or a 1 to 3 scale. A child gets 4s on the easy 3 targets, 3s on the medium targets, and 2s on the most challenging targets. Well, if we add those all up and divide by, we're giving that child a 3. Does that sound reasonable? Does that sound like that's an accurate representation? So if we break down to the targets derived from the standards, then we get to some greater clarity. So they're specific, clearly stated objectives, things that they need to know and be able to do within that larger standard. Here's the other added advantage. When I identify the targets that are held within a standard, I may rank them from least complex to most complex. In some of my least complex, I may only have to check in on formatively. In other words, they may not make their way to the summit of assessment, and I save myself then some of that assessment design creation volume that we sometimes get trapped by. So here's some sample elementary learning targets. We just thought we'd throw some together at the elementary, at the high school, and then again at some behavior. So students able to talk about characters, talk about the events. Students able to state a point of view, provide evidence. Students are able to identify the value of each digit in a 2-digit number. Locate his, her pulse in order to check their heart rate for a minute. At the secondary level, describe the reasons why the southern states seceded from the Union. Compare and contrast the Bohr and quantum mechanical models of the atom. Compare and contrast wildlife species. Analyze an equation or graph to determine the value of the limit at location of continuity, removable discontinuity, or non-removable discontinuity. I threw that in just for Isaac. So if you really want that last one explained to you, just text him when we're offline and he'll walk you through that baby. Sample behavior ones. Look, are these important things? Absolutely. Routinely completes and returns assigned work. I want that to happen. Respect for peers, adults, property. Classroom, school expectations followed. The directions, the procedures. They use technology responsibly. These are all important. They aren't connected to the academic realm and should not impact my academic progress. I need you to report on these. These are valuable and they should occur in a separate report card. So many of you will be familiar with Marzano's work, and he talks about guaranteed and viable curriculum. What does guaranteed mean? All kids get it at that grade level in that content area. Viable, it's accessible to every kid. I may need to break it down for those kids that are not there yet. I may do a pre-assessment and find out some of my kids are wildly successful at this particular target. I should do something to enrich their learning. As an aside, can we make sure we don't confuse enrich with volume? Mm-hmm. More isn't enrichment. It's poor planning. I can't imagine a kid who gets through the work quickly and you reward them with 5 more is overly excited about that. Now, they may be a good kid. They may be the compliant kid. They may actually say thanks. But I don't think that's a banner moment for that child. Right? So guaranteed and viable. Your autonomy as an educator doesn't come in the content you choose or not choose to deliver. It comes in how you deliver. Some of you may bring dramatic flair to your presentation. Some of you may sing. Some of you may need structure. Some of you may need desks in. That's fine. I never worried about any of that. As a school leader and as a district leader, here's what I needed to know. I could walk into anyone's classroom and walk up to a child and say, what are you learning today? And have them tell me something other than page 11. Mm-hmm. That they are able to talk about the target.
And Tom, I'm going to take over the screen for just a second.
Absolutely.
Because a few of the slides aren't showing quite right. But you can keep going. We've got a lot of people not really asking questions so far, but sharing different thoughts and insights and comments as we go. So we're glad to see that. Yes. And I'll let you keep trucking, but I just want to remind everybody, if you have those thoughts and questions, please share them in the chat, in Zoom, and or on the Facebook Live.
Yeah. So, as we start to look at, what we're trying to do around this, where are the areas, that we would have in the foldable and in the book? What we're not going to cover with all of you right now are the first 5 steps. The first 5 steps, I believe, are steps most people have taken in their jurisdictions. And those 5 steps really are about identifying priority standards, sorting those out throughout, looking for vertical alignment across all of the grade levels, and then building out both your instructional design and your assessment design from those ones that you've identified as priority. People call them priority, people call it need to know, people call it power, whatever terminology you use in your district. It's that we have agreement at this grade level in this content. This is the stuff we are going to be teaching our kids. Here's what it looks like over the year. We've got a sense of a pacing calendar that specifies where all the stuff will occur over the course of the school year. All right. So with that as the backdrop, where we start to go to then is to take those learning targets that are derived from the priority standards. So we break those standards down into targets. What this allows for too is greater understanding, deeper awareness of the content of those standards. And here's where we have a lot of great tools available to us. Many of you will be familiar with Webb's Depth of Knowledge. Many of you will be familiar with Karen Hess's work, where she's taken Webb's work and combined it with Bloom's work to create a matrix that will provide you with some stems that give us ways that we might both instruct and assess. Right? So that would be the next step we would have our colleagues take. From that, then, we go to those proficiency targets. What does it mean when you are basic, when you are approaching, when you are proficient? What are the things that we as a group of colleagues would be looking for to delineate kids reaching each of those levels? And by the way, what are we going to do for that extension, as I mentioned earlier? What are we going to do for that remediation, the not yet kids? Okay, so we start to build the proficiency targets delineated from the standards. We start to talk about what the different levels look like. So on your screens right now, you're seeing, this would be and we've got these across all the different grade levels, but this would be that kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. So you see down the side, we've got all of the different areas. And then we would go into looking at what the skills might be. So you can see that if we went into a particular area, if I looked at kindergarten ELA, then what we've got in reading literature, as you see on the screen there, what are some of the things that we're going to have as proficiency targets? Now, we're not going to have time today to get into this, but this is where we would create our report cards. So the report card for that child would have these targets. And they would have your scale 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0 to 4, whatever you and your team decide. And we'd be able to report out on those. We'd also make sure that people understood we're not getting to all those targets in every reporting period. Right? We'd also make sure people understood that if Tom was at A2 on the first learning target, that as that child progressed, that there was an opportunity to change their proficiency level. So if I became a 3, that we had the capacity to change that to a 3. That my current progress is the information I go home with, not my used to be progress. Okay? So you can see that we have these, as I said, across each of the grade levels. This is a middle school example in social studies, same sort of thing. What we need to do as a group of colleagues is talk about at each level, in each content area, what's a reasonable number of targets to have on each reporting period. Again, there is some flexibility that comes off of that. Right? So the more we get through those targets, the more then we know what we are teaching, how much time that teaching is going to take, and then how we build our assessments. This now really opens up the capacity we have to create outstanding assessments that are aligned to those learning targets. In other words, what I taught, how much time I devoted to teaching that, now appears on the assessment in roughly the same amount of time, a balance. Right? I'll go so far as initially when I'm creating this, when we first started to do this work, that I want you by the question to identify which learning target it was associated with. So that we know we've got a very streamlined approach, right? If we had a 4-week unit and I spent 1 week on this particular target, that target should roughly represent a quarter of the assessment, because I gave it that much importance early on. I bet everyone that's listening can recall an assessment that you felt was an unfair one, that you took as a student, that didn't align, that had some arcane reference to page 83 of the text. And by the way, it was this year's text, and page 83 was the only page they changed from last year's text, so they could cause you to have to buy this year's text. Right? It didn't make sense. So now we want to have our assessments align with instruction, with the targets. So this really puts a high premium on you having those very deep, meaningful dialogues around what's the need to know. Right? So then we get into looking at, and here's a sample, a high school science teacher in Winneconne, Wisconsin, that gave us what we might look for. So you can see, in this case, what you have there is the problem stated at the bottom, and then how we're going to be assessing that problem. So again, in this particular district, they are the 3-2-1, right? Proficient, approaching, and needs support. Not quite yet, basic. There is the problem at the bottom. After the child has turned that in, you can see the feedback that they would get then from their teacher. This can go into the next slide as well. Similar sort of setup. And then we get into delineating what the criteria look like. This is where you need to have some deep, meaningful dialogue with your colleagues. Again, this is the Winneconne example. Proficient, you've got it. Fully demonstrated content proficiency and skill, application for the outcomes, particular target at this point in the school year. Right? So if I got it early, great. If I got it late, great. I still am proficient.
That's so powerful. I keep going back to that analogy you shared about swimming.
Yeah, right?
We don't judge your swimming on how you do the first time in the water. And as Tom continues, if you have any questions coming up, now's a great time to put those in the comments on Facebook, and Donnie will share them to us, and or put them in the Zoom chat. And if something pops up, I'll let Tom know. And if you didn't see, we've got some great handouts in the chat and in the comments on Facebook. You'll definitely want those to memorialize your learning.
Yeah.
And Tom, just quick side note, if I'm too slow on the click, just say to click on. I know there's a delay between us.
Yeah, no worries. I think it stands to reason that everyone who is a teacher, everyone who's an educator, would say that at the start of the instruction, kids don't know it all. Because if they did, hopefully you'd move on to something else. Right? But if we agree then the objective is to get them the knowledge, the need to know package, we should expect that some kids will need support early on. And if that causes you to design your instruction in a way that closes the gap, we can't have them, because once upon a time they were a 1, that they are forever a 1, or that they have to carry that 1. Right?
This is a great question from Anita right before I switch on to that next slide. Yep. She says, and you may come to this later, so you can choose to do that, but how do you push students thinking after they're proficient?
Yeah, right. So what's that stretch? What's that extension that goes beyond proficient? Now, I think we have to look at a couple of things. I'm a big fan of every school having a block of time every day to help kids, right? I wouldn't call it intervention time, because intervention has become stigmatized in our profession. If I say the word intervention, everybody all of a sudden devolves to the kids that are struggling. I like to call it win time, W-I-N, what I need time. Those kids who are wildly proficient based on both your pre-assessment and your general knowledge as you are starting to deliver instruction. I see that Isaac's already got this. What do I have to stretch him? Again, not volume, but how am I going to get him to apply his knowledge? Right? Could it be cross-curricular? Could we, during win time, resort our kids and have those kids who are wildly proficient go off and do a master project, an application of their knowledge, that extension, right? Could it go cross-curricular? So now I have them take what we are doing in language arts, writing a persuasive essay based on evidence they've gathered in physical education to prove the point that daily physical activity is better for you than not. Could they graph the data using mathematical application? Right? So we start to look at how we begin then to take our kids who are proficient and give them something meaningful.
Powerful. And people love that when somebody added an extra N to it, W-I-N-N, what I need now.
Yeah. Right. And we've seen a lot of places build that time in. And I know people are
Mhm.
going to say, look, we don't have time. We got to go, got to go, got to go, got to go. I just don't know then how we accommodate this. If my expectation for you is in your classroom, in addition to dealing with the myriad of kid needs right now, with the large numbers of kids you have, I need you also now to enrich and remediate and keep, even if we said it was only 3 bands of kids, that becomes a complex issue, right?
Mhm.
So that additional block of time, we don't get to create new time. It's got to come from what you have. Take 5 minutes off each period, add it. Listen, remember what I said earlier, right? That's the ultimate goal. What's your next first step? Can you do it once a week? Start with it. Monitor it. Here's what I know. Whenever we've tried it in schools, it's become so wildly successful that the adults get together and say, look, we got to do more of this because it's having impact. My kids are doing better in, right?
That's powerful. So it really builds its own practice. You see it
Yeah,
working and you want to do more.
for sure. And it's tied into this slide, about us looking at the assessments. Right? So what did we find out when we got together and looked at these well-crafted, well-designed assessments? The first place we have to go, if a bunch of kids got the same question wrong, the first place I have to turn to is here. Is it in the design of the question? As a science teacher, I found it very powerful to have my language arts colleagues read my science test, not for the content knowledge, but does it make sense what I'm asking for from your skill set? So that's the first place. Second place I'm going to go to is, so now, did I teach that skill, that target,
Mhm.
with the intention? Did it, was it on me? Can I remember that that was the day, because I happen to be coaching, that I was away? This is not meant to denigrate the person who came in my place,
Mhm.
but maybe they didn't teach it with the same flourish that I teach it. Third thing, is it really a complex matter that will demand some reteach time? And if I reteach, then I've got to reassess, right? So we go through this notion. Where did kids do well? By the way, when they did well, I also need to tie it back to my teaching, right? It's
Mhm.
all right that you give yourself a pat on the back and say, yeah, I remember that lesson. I could tell that day that kids all got it, right? And I want to remember that for the next time I deliver that, right? And then when we start to look at the levels of support, how do we then provide that support? Let's go back to win time. That may be an option.
Mhm.
Once we commit to reteach and reassess, then the kids get the grades that they earned. I don't need a mathematical formula. I don't need to limit how smart they are. I need them to have the grade that they earned, full on. Right? Once they got it, they got it. There doesn't need to be a requirement that says, no, it's only the first time kids that get it that we are willing to give full credit to. Okay. Other slide. So again, we start to look at how we get there. We give the kids the feedback. Here is the learning target. Um, Kids can go into the assessment and say, look, I'm not sure I'm ready. Isn't it better that we have kids say, I'm not sure I'm proficient on this target. I think I need to do some other stuff to close the gap, right? Rather than me just plowing ahead. Listen, if I've done formative really well, I got a pretty clear idea where the summative is going to roll out. I may need to do a bit more teach.
Mhm.
Listen, if I get into the after the assessment and I analyze it, we often talk about wanting to make a real world connection. Here's a real world connection I think works well for kids. Isaac mentioned earlier, I like to run. Listen, as I get older and I do marathons, my body takes a little while to respond. So after a marathon, I need to see a massage therapist.
Mhm.
If I want to see a massage therapist, what do I need to do? I need to book an appointment. Listen, you guys are experts. If a student, after your brilliant instruction, based on the evidence from the assessment, doesn't quite demonstrate proficiency on the learning target, they need your expertise. You want to make a real world example? Here's the real world example. You need to see an expert, you should make an appointment. I don't want every one of you sitting in your rooms every day at lunch hoping a kid comes by. Here's what that looks like. Isaac, you didn't quite get proficiency on these 3 targets. I need you to analyze what you did wrong and set up a growth plan. And Isaac says, well, yeah, okay, I think I could do it on these 2. I just need more practice. But on this one, I don't really get it. I need a bit more teach time. Perfect. When do you want to have that teach time? Next Tuesday at 12? Great. Here's your appointment card. Please bring it with you. That's a real world example. And Isaac shows up at the assigned time with his appointment card. And we go through and he gets 20 minutes of teach time. And just like when I go for a massage, my therapist says, wow, you are in rough shape. You're going to need another appointment. And I get another appointment card. If I'm good to go, you know what I book? I book my next marathon. If Isaac's good to go after the reteach, we book his reassessment. And I'm using the words reassessment, not retest, because I think there's a delineation. Retest for me implies you're doing the whole test again. Reassessment, you're just going in on the stuff you didn't get, right? So Isaac's going to get reassessed on what he didn't get. Now we start to talk about then how we give feedback to everybody. What does it look like? Feedback got to be just in time, just for me, if it's going to have impact. All right. So our next slide. I think we're almost getting to the end here. Right. So we talk about the notion of being reassessed. I want kids to own the reassessment. I don't want it to be an automatic. I want it to be based on your first attempt was your very best effort. Because then when we have you analyze that first effort, you can come back to me as your teacher and say, here's the gaps. Here's what I don't know yet. Here's how I think I can close the gap. I need a bit of teach time. Great. We go through that. We set that up. The last couple of slides are on this, how we might report out on social skills, on the behavior ends of things. So again, this is in the WINNEGONNE district. This is their elementary school, their PAW, practice kindness, always show respect, work to do your best. 3, 2, 1, same sort of thing. Consistently, sometimes, rarely. You'll populate it with whatever words you want, whichever ones are important to you in your school. This also works. The next example is a high school one. Same sort of thing, right? So we can go to the high school example, same elements. What is it about, right? So the PAW rubric at WINNEGONNE Secondary, I think it's the next slide, Isaac. Same thing, right? Listen, work to do your best. If a kid is caught cheating, you see that column that says academic honesty? That's where we put that. I think cheating is a significant challenge in schools. I think we need to have kids understand the ramifications of cheating. I think they need to understand that if they got caught cheating on their job as an adult, they could potentially lose their job. If they got caught cheating at college, they could be. I think we need to teach them. I don't think we teach them by replicating. If the only thing that happens when you get caught cheating is I give you a 0, I think the life lesson I've taught you is this: don't get caught. That's not the life lesson I want.
Yeah.
Okay? Don't get caught is not what I need you carrying forward. Be a better cheater is not what I want, right? You'll see the strive for excellence. That's where I park homework. Look, I'm giving you extra practice. It's not going to count for your mark, but if you are a 2 on the learning target and you come to me and say, what do I need to do to get a 3? I'm going to go back and check. Well, you know what? You've hardly ever done any of the practice questions. So it's really hard for me to dive in and drill in on what you need to do to close the gap. Why don't you try some of these? Right? It is connected then to that opportunity. So we have 3 slides that really are, and this will be in the handout as well. What do you think you need to start? What do you need to stop? What do you need to continue to make this flow for you? And I really want it to be framed around that next first step. I'm not in favor of an all or nothing. You know, you're either going to do it now or you're no. Listen, if we were to talk about reassessment, if you are staunchly opposed to reassessment, I'm not here to tell you you're right or wrong. I'm here to tell you that my belief is we ought to give every kid a reassessment. So in a reassessment paradigm of 1 to 10, I might be a 10. It's all right if you're a 1. Here's what we need to do. What might it take for you to move 2 or 3 points up the scale? What do you need to be able to move? By the way, what evidence do you have that I should move, that I'm wrong? I'm willing to listen to that as well as we start to have these conversations. But it needs to be based on evidence, not on I'm really good at it, right? I got really good at raising my voice. I don't think that was an effective teaching strategy. I don't think it inspired any kids, right? So what is it about? What evidence do you have that it works? Listen, ultimately, at the end of the day, here's what I need you to do. I need you to bring the passion to your profession. I need you to be passionate educators, because here's what I know about passion. It's driven by your beliefs. I don't need you to be emotional educators. Emotions are driven by feelings. And when we get into talking about that end of things, we end up getting distracted and away from our core. Go back to that first slide. What's your why? Why do you grade and assess? Do you see it as a communication vehicle, or do you see it as a compensation vehicle? Because if it's about compensation, if you're engaged in a number chase, then you can probably pretty much file your final marks at the end of the first month of teaching. If you're about an evidence chase, then you're going to be able to continue to want to gather that evidence. By the way, if I do evidence really well, it lets me take care of the number at the end of the year.
We had a couple of good questions along the lines of some advice you might have while we're in this virtual world. So I wonder, as we continue through these 3 slides, if maybe you give an idea or two for how to start right now, and then as we get to the stop and continue, maybe those same ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And so you know, if we're looking at how we begin now in this new world that we're in, that won't allow for a volume of stuff to come in, and we've got that concern. The other concern I've had people share with me is, what if the parents are doing all the work when I'm not on the screen with the kid? All right, well, so what is it about that you want? What's the target that you need some demonstration of proficiency in that now we can't get out of a maybe traditional paper and pen test? So what other vehicles do we have? Do we have the capacity to have kids share in a video? Do we have kids' capacity to keep a journal that maybe we can check, they can take screenshots of? Do we have the ability for them to demonstrate in a variety of ways? You know, listening to my 6-year-old and 7-year-old grandson, we had them FaceTime the other day because that's the only way we can connect them now. And a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old were talking about pandemic and talking about the need to flatten the curve in their 2 communities so they could stop social isolation. My goodness. You know what? When I was 6, I was talking to my friends about flattening bugs, right? I think that their teacher listening in on that conversation would be able to give those kids credit for a number of learning targets that they have achieved. Their ability to differentiate, their ability to compare and contrast 2 different communities and where they are at in terms of flattening the curve. What does flattening the curve mean from a mathematical perspective? Right? There's all kinds of ways now that we might be able to tie into that might look a little bit different. One of the things I need you to make sure you do, by the way, during this time, is record those things somewhere that are working really well and commit to carrying them forward as crisis passes. Some of the things we might need to stop. Are there things that you are currently doing that you don't have evidence that they work for? Listen, when I started teaching, I started off as a high school science teacher. I heard from my colleagues that we gave out more zeros than any other department. And when I asked why, I had the temerity to ask why as a first-year teacher, I was told quite clearly, because we are science, the last true pure subject. There are no easy passes in science. So I gave out zeros. Here's what I've come to realize. Zeros don't motivate anybody. I have yet to have a kid who says that got a 0, that got better, that got smarter and more compliant. Zeros are our weapon, right? They're an expression of dissatisfaction. So I need you to think about which things are you doing currently right now that are not getting you what you need. Because if we're going to hold on to meeting deadlines in this new environment, my goodness, we're going to be disappointed. We're going to be disappointed because some kids don't have access to the technology. We're going to be disappointed because some kids don't have the proficiency to use the technology really well. Kids are going to miss deadlines. And if our only recourse right now is to say you're giving a 0 because you missed the deadline, I think we're going to see an increase in, and I don't think we're going to close the gap on learning. So what are the things we're doing or we used to do that right now aren't lending itself to this environment that we might need to stop? It could be a temporary stop, but I think you're going to find out some of those things that you're going to stop, you probably don't want to go back to, right? Continue. Listen, I'm hearing almost universally how much we miss our kids, how important the relationship is. And I need that to not be a temporary feeling. I need that to be embraced when the kids return. I need them to know how much you missed the connection authentically, not just because it got you out of the house, right? I think people are sincere when they say that. I think this has shocked all of our systems in a way. So now we have this whole notion of grading and assessment as a way, I think, to build connections, to build relationships, to remind kids of the value, and not simply use that evidence as a rank sort mechanism. We're going to get our kids back eventually. Who knows when that will be? I think we're all hoping for sooner rather than later. But when that moment happens, let's hope we have built up enough evidence that'll allow them to continue on with their schooling and their education. Are there questions, Isaac?
Yeah, one more question I think we should hit before we start to wrap up is, what are some things people do? And this is for anybody who can comment in the chat or online too, but what are some things people do when kids are missing many of those prerequisite skills, especially from previous grades, that are not actually addressed in that learning target? Once you've broken down those learning targets, rather.
Yeah, and you know, and we see that, you know, with the layout of the standards, right? There isn't a whole lot. If I go back to mathematics, because that's one of the areas, you know, mathematics has as the topic or the content piece, geometry is the only one that continues through, right? All the other ones seem to be a little bit disparate. Well, I also know that, you know, money, although as a unique construct topic, I think only appears in about the 3rd grade. Money is a great vehicle for teaching mathematics. So I'm going to extend that through. Again, I'm a big fan of pre-assessment. If pre-assessment means that I've exposed some gaps, I'm not about to blame my previous year's colleague. I just need to know I need to dial back the teaching to where my kids are at. I bet everyone on this call today has had those moments where today's lesson was awesome. Everything flowed. You went home dancing. You know, today was the day why I became a teacher. That lesson worked so well. You went home that night and you laminated it. And next year you pull out your laminated lesson and crickets.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. What I need to remember is different kids, right? You got to teach the kids you have, not the ones you used to have, not the ones you'd like to have, not the ones that only exist in your imagination, but the actual ones showing up. So I may need to dial it back based on where my current kids are. Right?
Thank you so much, Tom. As we click onto this, I just want to let you know people are asking about the book. So I'm going to put a link to that in our follow-up email. And Tom's got a couple more things to share with you. And then I'm going to wrap us up, but just want to let everybody know who's in the chat or on Facebook Live. If you have a question that you don't quite get answered, please email Tom or I. We've got that information in there, or just reach out to the Core Collaborative, and we will always do everything we can to partner with you and to help you. Thank you, everybody, for being on, and we'll be on for a few more minutes. And Tom has something powerful, and that I think is something that he really embodies just from a little bit I've gotten to know him, and as a marathoner and an educational marathoner going for almost 4 decades now.
So there you go. You know, I think we talked about this at the beginning. You know, this notion of this change around grading and assessment may induce some fear. And I love the notion that fear has 2 meanings, right? We can forget everything and run. That might be my first response, but I prefer the second one. Right? Which is to face everything and rise. Going shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues. These are the moments where you got to look each other in the eye and say, we got this. Yeah, it's a little bit different. I got to let go of stuff that's been so comfortable and so second nature.
Mm-hmm.
But is it working? Right? Shoulder to shoulder, I think we've got the capacity to face everything and rise. This is one of those moments that we're going through right now.
That's so powerful. And people right away are saying they love that. And of course, they're saying thank you. If you want to get up with Tom in other ways, you can take a quick screenshot or picture of this link. And we put all of the ways to get in touch with him right there. And of course, you can email us. I'm Isaac at thecorecollaborative.com, and I'll pass things along. We want you to know that there's a lot of ways that we are trying to give back to all the amazing educators out there who have made the Core Collaborative so successful over these past 6 years. And the umbrella for this is the Core Contributes. So if you visit thecorecontributes.com, you'll find links to master classes like what we've just done with Tom. We're excited about our 2 next ones. Michael McDowell really digging into rigorous problem-based learning and what that means, what that looks like. And then Nathan Lang Rod spending some time supporting those of us who support the teachers who are supporting students, because, you know, we need coaching too. And so that's 2 great things. And then the whole rest of the year, we have amazing people, not just like Tom, but like Tom joining us. We are really excited about this. Through Mimi and Todd Press, we have this new Authored and Inspired series being led by Star Saxton, who's our editor. So Monday, April 20th, be on the lookout for our first one to launch with Professor Alan Daly. Very exciting. And in Authored and Inspired, you hear from authors, not just about their book, but about what drove them to write and how they write, a bit about their process, a bit about their motivation. And that's really exciting to see. In this virtual world, many of us are finding solace in our Twitter community, which I never thought I'd say, as well as great ideas. And Star has also begun this great core chat, which has been really successful, but just search for hashtag core chat every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And we hope you'll join us there. Lunch and Learn, we have amazing people from across the country and beyond sharing bite-sized video PD that we launch it's why it's Lunch and Learn. We launch it every day at noon Eastern, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But because we keep it all on YouTube, you can grab it and go anytime it's convenient for you. We hope you'll check that out. We also hope you have something to share that you'll reach out to me and do one with us. On Facebook, we have 3 different coaching sessions every week. We've got Hacking School Discipline with Brad and Nathan, 1 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday. Paul and Dave Horton and others and I doing our Leading Impact Teams page, 3 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow morning, teachers throwing out grades with Star Saxton at 11 a.m. Eastern. And of course, those are all recorded on Facebook Live as well. We've got the Core Communique, which is our blog. Some great things coming up, but especially this remote learning and student engagement over the next week or so. Very apropos. And then if you're like me, I do a lot of laundry and dishes late at night, cut the grass on the weekends, and I love to have something to listen to. So you can check out our Podcast Central, which we are building up with podcasts shared from our amazing learning network. And then something we are really excited about, our Chief Learning Officer, Dr. Paul Bloomberg, and Kara Vondas, an amazing author and educator as well, have really been working on developing some new ideas in our virtual professional learning. First, we have some different things. We've been doing our video coaching, where we have self-paced courses, and of course, blended learning, where there's some face-to-face when that's safe. But one thing in particular, which I spoke in opposite order, apology for that, but this is the one that Paul and Kara solely have really developed, and a lot of us are helping them flesh out, but is clarity for remote teaching and learning. So some of the questions we got during Tom's session were like, okay, great. give me 1 or 2 concrete ways to make this work today. And that's what this is really about. How can we engage students with meaningful learning, hitting those learning targets that we need, but giving them choice and taking into account that our students come from very different backgrounds and very different situations. So we want to make things as powerful for them. And like Tom has made so clear with us today, that we give them those opportunities to engage and learn and reassess. Screenshot this. These are some of the ways you can keep in touch with us, and we hope you will. Share the great things you're doing and look at the great things our partners are doing. And Tom, give us that fear definition one more time as we wrap up.
Forget everything and run, or face everything and rise.
I love it.
I think it's time for us to rise.
Yes, together we rise. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. This is our master class, and we are here every third Thursday.